Hi everyone, it looks like we're live. Welcome to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. And it's the final day of the month, the final day of the year in fact. So it's time to do a wrap up of the books I've been reading during the last few weeks. So there's quite a lot to get through, so as usual. So I shall charge straight in. First up, two books I borrowed from the library are All Systems Red and Artificial Condition, both by Martha Wells. So these are books 1 and 2 in a series that is currently 4 books long. A 5th book is coming. It's sci-fi, which is not my usual genre, as many of you will know. And I'm actually I had to read the first one because we're doing it as part of our Drama Talk read-along, myself and my good friend Alina. We'll be discussing it in January. We haven't got a date yet, but probably mid-January we'll be doing our Drama Talk live stream, if I can speak, and we'll be discussing this book. So, as I said, it's not something I'd usually read, but in the end, I really loved it. I gave book 1 5 stars and book 2 4.5 stars. The basic premise is our main character, Murderbot, is a security bot, essentially, who has hacked his systems and gotten independence. And he jokes that, he could have gone off and killed people, but instead he just spends hours illegally downloading entertainment stuff from the various channels, TV series and films and the like. So there's a lot of humour, but there's also a fair bit of drama and action going on as well, as he gets himself in and out of various situations. I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to spoil it. But this is really, I would say, this is sci-fi for someone who would say, as I did, I'm not a sci-fi reader. There are sci-fi, obviously it's a sci-fi story, there are sci-fi elements. However, it's not one of those books that puts me off sci-fi with all that really hard science all the time, pages and pages describing how everything works and things, which doesn't appeal to me, but there's none of that in this book. There's enough that you can get the gist of what's happening and how things are working, but it doesn't go over the top. And as I said, there's a great deal of humour as well. So definitely, if you're someone who's hesitant about reading sci-fi, this is a series I would recommend as a really light, nice, easy way to get into it. Moving on, some more books I borrowed from the library. In fact, I think I've put them all together. Yes, I have. So all these ones, until I tell you differently, are borrowed from the library. The next up is a Manga-Lover's Guide to Tokyo by Evangeline Neo. This was a 3.5 star read for me. It's done as a kind of graphic novel. The pictures are cute. Some of the stories as she's trying to introduce her family to aspects of Japanese culture and things are amusing. However, for me personally, I didn't feel there was a huge amount. I mean, it's called a Manga Lover's Guide, but actually the otaku content was fairly low. And I thought A Geek's Guide to Tokyo was actually better in that respect, in terms of telling you where shops are, where you can go, things you can do. So 3.5 stars. It was fun. There was a bit of interesting info, but it just wasn't the focus that I'd expected it to be. So it didn't appeal to me as widely as it might to others. Next up, I finally finished reading the 20 volumes of the Bakuman manga by Ohba and Obata, who previously wrote Death Note. This was a 4.5 star read for me overall. I gave most of the volumes 4 stars, I think, as I was reading them, but it was a really enjoyable series, and it's a great departure from the other works of theirs together, which have all been sort of fantasy, a little bit dark, in that it was the story of two young boys who are trying to become manga artists. I really loved seeing it. You get a lot of behind the scenes feel for how manga is written, how it's published. I'm sure there's a few exaggerations for the sake of the story here and there, but I imagine a good 80% of it is probably true. Looking at how series get picked up, why they get cancelled, it's very competitive from the sounds of it in keeping your story going, and you have to get back these reader surveys, and if you're not getting good results, then you're going to be axed. So it was fascinating. There's a romance element to the story as well. I wasn't quite so fussed about that part of it, which is probably why I didn't get 5 stars, because I did tend to skim those sections a little bit more. But in terms of following the careers of these, upcoming manga artists, I thought it was a really great clever idea and well executed. Sticking with manga, I also read Crimson Spell. This is by Ayano Yamane. Yes, Yamane. Ayano Yamane, I think. So this was a 4-star one for me. This is a boys' love manga, a boys' love fantasy. One of the characters has used a cursed sword, which means he's now got a demon stuck inside him, essentially. Another character is a mage who's meant to be helping him rid himself of the demon. Whenever the demon comes out, one way the mage has found to quiet it is to have sex with it, unbeknownst to the main character, who doesn't remember things when he comes back into his own form. So that's the basic premise. There's quite a lot of sex in it. It was enjoyable. I think it was a fun idea. I liked the characters. And yeah, look, it's not a very deep story at the end of the day. It's more about the two characters getting it on with a bit of magic thrown in. But if that's your thing, definitely check it out. And finally, from the library, I read 2 more travel guides planning for my Japan trip next year. So the first was the Lonely Planet Tokyo guide, and the second was the Lonely Planet Japan guide. These were both 4 stars for me. As always, useful information. Not all of it was of particular interest to me. Some bits were, some bits weren't. But as with any travel guides, it's always worth having a look just to get the gist of where you can go, what is available, things to do, travel tips. So I'm glad I read them anyway, and I'll do some more planning as the next few months go by. Excuse me, I'm sort of trying not to yawn because it's been very hot here and I haven't slept well the last few nights, so I'm a little bit tired and I can just feel a yawn coming on, so bear with me. So moving on, so a few books now that I read from NetGalley. I think, I've put them all together. Yes, I have. So until I tell you otherwise, all these books came via NetGalley. The first up was a couple of manga. The first is Parham Itan, Volume 1 by Kaili Sorano. This was a 4-star read for me. It's a fantasy horror. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. It's interesting. I found it a little bit confusing, and I believe this is a manga that is based on light novels. So I'm assuming that they're expecting readers to know the story, because you get thrown straight into the action with not much background about what's going on. And I sort of came to get my head around it, what was happening. And when I did, I enjoyed the idea and I liked the characters and I liked the artwork. But it's probably why it got 4 stars for me, because there was just that element where I was a little bit lost, initially at least. I would read on. I wouldn't rush to do so, but if I got the opportunity to pick up Volume 2, I would read it. So if you want a sort of fantasy story manga with a slightly more of a horror aspect of fantasy focus, then this is one for you. Next up, 3.5-star read for me was Don't Call Me Dirty by Garou Kanbe. This is a story, it's an LGBT story, and it's about a young man who befriends a homeless guy, and eventually their relationship goes a bit beyond friends. And it's looking at some way the idea of stereotypes and how we treat people, and how the guy's being treated as gay, and how this guy's being treated as homeless and being dirty and disheveled, and equating the two in a way. There was just something about it that it's really hard to say what it was, but there was just something that left me a little bit on edge about it, and something to do with the portrayals, I think, particularly of the gay character. And I can't even tell you exactly what it was, but there was just something that didn't sit quite right with me, which is probably why it got 3.5 stars. In some ways I liked it. I liked the idea of getting over stereotypes and judging people for who they are, not by outward appearance or by what society thinks they should be like. So that aspect I thought was really good. But as I said, there was just something that didn't, and it might be a cultural thing. Perhaps it's just the way that homosexuality is portrayed in different cultures, that it's not what I'm used to, and so it's not sitting quite right with me. But there was, just a little niggle I had that I can't quite put my finger on. Next up was The Little Book of Japanese Living by Yutaka Yazawa. And this one I really adored. It's 5-star read for me. It's a cute little book that's kind of a part Japanese history, part travel log in a way. It sort of talks about different areas of Japan, a little bit on Japanese culture. It's kind of like, I mean, I guess it's called The Little Book of Japanese Living. I guess it is a little book that covers a lot of different aspects of Japan. It's one I like so much I'm considering buying it, actually. It's really sweet. A few good little bits and pieces in there. And if you're interested in Japan and Japanese culture, then it's definitely worth checking out. I think it comes out in February. It was a arc that I received, obviously, so I don't think it's quite out yet in the next few weeks, I think. But definitely have a look if you come across it, because it's really sweet. As I said, 5 stars. And the last, oh no, not the last, I've got 2 more NetGalley reads. So first off, 3 Tigers, 1 Mountain by Michael Booth. So this is non-fiction slash history. I say slash and you'll find out why in a moment. Let me have a quick drink first, excuse me. So continuing all my things Japanese at the moment, this book is looking at Japan, China and Korea. And it looks at their relationships, both historical and present, which is why I said sort of history. I really have to say don't have a lot of background on the history of these countries, because until this recent interest in anime and manga got me into Japan and the Japanese language, it's not an area of the world, Asia, that I've particularly spent a lot of time studying. So I was actually quite surprised when I read some of the things that have gone on between the 3 countries. I had no idea of how their relationships had played out in the past and what they were like now. So it was surprising. I definitely learned a huge amount from this book, both in terms of their relationships and in terms of the individual countries' history as well. So it was 4 stars for me. There were a few bits here and there that were a little bit dry, but essentially it was a really interesting read. The author manages to get a little bit of humour in there because he's writing this as he's travelling around the countries. So he did a tour starting in Japan and then went on a little circuit through these 3 nations. So as he's travelling, he's trying to find out about attitudes of one country towards the other. So he's interviewing people. There's a load of great little anecdotes, some humorous elements he's trying to get by and get to grips with the culture and everyone's feelings. So it's really worth reading if you're interested in Asian history and culture again. And finally, my last NetGalley one for December was You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce. And this was a 4.5 star read for me. It's kind of a dark fairy tale slash magical realism slash mystery thriller. It's a bit of a genre bend, I have to say. The basic premise is there's a woman who has in the past been accused of murder. She's always said it wasn't me and has blamed it on the fairies. There are these creatures who she says have been with her since she was a child, with whom in some cases she has very complicated relationships. And it's kind of left to the reader to decide, do we believe her version, the fairy tale, dark fairy tale version of events, or do we believe that she is an abused child who has psychological problems and that she is the one who committed the murder and has created this fantasy to cover it up to herself. So that's the basic premise. I won't tell you any more than that because I don't want to spoiler it, but I found it absolutely fascinating. It was really a page-turning read. I loved the way the tale of the fairy side of things was laid out. Definitely is something, as I said, a bit genre bending and a little bit different, and I highly recommend it. Next up was a reread, which is very rare for me. I don't often get a lot of time for rereads, but I just ended up with about a 4-day span between finishing the books I had here and my birthday. And I knew I was going to get new books for my birthday, so I didn't want to go out and buy or get a hold of new books myself. So I just needed something to fill 4 days. So I decided to reread Sunshine by Robin McKinley. This was a 5-star read the first time I read it, and it's still a 5-star read for me. It's a vampire tale. A young girl with powers, sort of a magical witch / nature, is kidnapped by vampires and is chained up alongside another vampire who's the enemy of the other vampires. It's vampire conflict everywhere. And they form a sort of uneasy alliance in order to escape that then continues as they have to face off against this main group of vampires later. I've always loved it. I think it's a great story. I like the dark elements. It's a fairly dark story. There is a little bit of romance element, but I like the way it's handled. Again, it's very dark and tentative, and we don't quite know what way it's going to go. But definitely, if you're into vampire stories with romance but a darker aspect, then Sunshine by Robert McKinley is one for you. So next up, we're still going, yes. Song of the Sea Maid by Rebecca Mascull. Now this one is one that I received from my friend. I wasn't expecting it. She sent me a package with my Christmas present, and she'd included this book as well. So I had no expectations about it. And in the end, it was a 3-star read for me. It's historical fiction, and the basic premise is our main character, Dawny, is a young woman who grows up in an orphanage, but she's got a thirst for knowledge, which is eventually recognised by some of the adults who give her opportunities to study. And she becomes a naturalist. Now, I should say this is taking place in 1740s, 1750s-ish. And so unusually for her time, she's trying to be fairly independent, study science and the like. Eventually, she ends up persuading her benefactor to let her travel to Portugal and then Minorca in search of artifacts and to continue her studies of the natural world, where she gets unfortunately caught up in the war between the English and French. Now, this was a slightly weird book. I mean, I didn't dislike it. It was fairly easy reading. I enjoyed the opening. I thought the premise was really strong. I liked the idea of Dawny as a character. However, I didn't like Dawny as a character, if I can express it that way. She's incredibly selfish. She whines and whinges until she gets what she wants, and really only thinks of herself most of the time. So I found it really hard to get behind her and root for her because she was just a little bit unlikable. And the story also then devolved into this romance with a sea captain. And I didn't hate the romance, but I just thought that at that point it detracted from the other aspect of the plot with her studies and her trying to be independent in what was at the time a man's world. So I think it lost its way from the start to the end, and that's why it got 3 stars. It wasn't awful. I didn't hate turning every page, but it's not a book I'd rush to reread, and I think it had a lot of weaknesses that where things could have been handled better. So next up, a book I bought for myself was RustBlaster by Toboso Yana. So Toboso Yana is the author of the Black Butler manga, and this is a 1-volume manga that she wrote prior to that. It's a vampire story, and in some ways there are odd elements of it that made me think of Vampire Night in a way. I gave it 4 stars. I think it was a really interesting premise. The vampires have got to protect humanity, or the good vampires have got to protect humanity from the bad vampires. And there's going to be this culmination of this event with 2 moons that's coming. However, I felt that it needed more than 1 volume. We didn't get much time at all for character development, and we didn't even quite get enough time, I don't think, for explaining some of the things going on with this moon event. And the end in particular felt really rushed. And I think if this had been twice as long, if this had been 2 volumes instead of 1, then she would have had time to really get the nitty-gritty of the characters' emotions out, and also the aspects of the plot that, although they weren't incomprehensible, I think they could have done with a bit more explanation just to make us really understand what was happening and why. Interestingly, though, you know, that you can see snatches here and there of where her styles developed as she moved into Black Butler. So it was definitely a really interesting read. I have also glanced online at one or two bits of her old yaoi work as well, which is quite fun. But yes, and this is worth checking out. If you like vampire manga and if you're a Black Butler fan, then you should have a look. It's worth seeing, and you can definitely see how she's developed as an artist and storyteller over the last years since doing this work through to the stuff she's doing now in Black Butler. Moving on, the next few books are ones I got for birthday and Christmas that I've already read. So Goethe's Elective Affinities. This was a 4-star read for me. Previously of Goethe, I've read obviously The Sorrows of Young Berta and some of the erotic poems. So this is a new piece for me. It's a story of marriage and love, and in some ways, how do you keep marriage going and avoid temptation, I guess. It's mirroring a period in Goethe's own life when he was married but was attracted to this younger woman. And so in this book, we have a married couple really happy together in a wonderful relationship. And one of them wants to invite to stay a friend of his who's down on his luck. And the woman's a bit resistant at first, doesn't want to disturb their happy life together and their atmosphere, but eventually relents as long as she can bring in a young girl who she has an interest in and wants to help. So these two people come to live with them. And eventually this married couple find themselves attracted to these other parties. And that's essentially the premise of the story and what unfolds from that. Again, I'm not going to spoiler it, tell you what happens, but that's the setup of what's going on. And as I said, 4 stars for me. I think it lacks the punch of The Sorrows of Young Berta, but it's still a really fascinating study of human nature and our approach to love and attraction and commitment, I guess, as well. So worth reading if you're a classic literature fan. Next up, I read Kent Folktales by Tony Cooper, which again is a 4-star read for me. This is a selection of folktales from my home county of Kent, where I grew up, where I was born, grew up before I moved to Australia. Some really wonderful tales. As with the previous book of folktales that I've gotten from this publisher, I have to say I preferred the ones earlier in the book, which are older, more traditional tales. 1 or 2 at the end were a lot newer from the 20th century. And I don't know, for me, it's not quite the same. To me, folktales should have old provenance. I'm not quite so fussed about modern day made up folktales. If you see what I mean, I kind of like that, to have that history behind them, but that's just me. And it's still a really good collection. So if you're interested in folklore from England, this History Press do a whole mass of these books, and they do one for each county. So I went for the Kent one because that's where I'm from, but they also do them for Yorkshire and Surrey and all the other counties as well. Next up, Gingerbread Wonderland by Mima Sinclair, and another 4-star read. This is one my sister bought me, and it's a cookbook, as you might guess from the title, all with gingerbread recipes. Recipes for making the gingerbread, but also ideas for presentation in terms of gingerbread houses and various things. So it's a really cute book. I haven't tried any of the recipes yet because I got it for Christmas, and we're still eating Christmas chocolate and leftovers at the moment on the 31st of December. So I don't want to cook any more sweets at the moment. But I will eventually try some of the recipes. I've got one of my friends who saw it on my Facebook post and who wants to now get it because she's a big gingerbread fan as well. Next up was Milan Kundera's Ignorance, and this is a 5-star read for me. I'm a huge fan of Milan Kundera. I think I'm down to about 2 books left of his that I haven't read that I still need to get now that I've read this one. I really adore the way he portrays human nature and emotion. I think he absolutely is right on point with it. You really feel that you understand where his characters are coming from and that you've experienced something similar yourself when you read his works. This one is looking at 2 ideas, really. First of all, a sense of returning home and nostalgia, because the characters involved are Czech emigres who left at the time of communism and coming back after the revolution and to a democratic Czech Republic, and how they feel, how they perceive their country and its people now, and how they're perceived by those people as kind of being other in a way, having been away. And also the idea of memory. Two of the characters, the two main characters, meet up, and they used to know each other in the past before they both emigrated, but they both have very different memories of the time. And the fact that that can really affect their relationship now, because they're coming from very different places as they think about their past relationship and where they think things are going now. Again, I don't want to spoil the story at all, but if you're into literary fiction that's not heavy reading but still comes across with a bit of a message and thought-provoking ideas, then Milan Kundera I definitely recommend. Next up, musicals, the definitive illustrated story. This was a 5-star read for me. I really love this book. I've got several books on the history of musicals, and something about this one when I saw it on Book Depository just appealed to me, and I decided to give it a look and put it on my wish list. My parents bought it for me for Christmas, and it really is pretty wonderful. It looks right back, obviously, from Gilbert and Sullivan operetta era, right up to the musicals coming out in the 2000s, in the last decade or two. I loved the layout. Where they focus on a particular musical, there was a really great timeline for each that showed you the plot of the story and where the songs fall, which I really enjoyed. Some of the other information is the stuff you find in every book about musicals, but there was a bit of a new approach to the presentation of it that I really liked. One other thing I loved was that it included some foreign language musicals. So many times you read these history of musicals books and all they want to do is talk about the English and American shows. And there are some really awesome musicals out there coming from Europe, French Canada, Japan. And this book didn't mention any Asian ones, but it did mention some of the big German and French language ones, which I really, really appreciated, because these are great shows and some of them are quite well known across the world. I mean, it did a one full page on Elizabeth, which is an Austrian musical that I love. And it's never been put on in English. However, it has been put on all around the world in Hungarian, Japanese. It's a very popular show, even though it hasn't kind of made it to an English audience yet. So I really liked that they included that, because that is a fairly major show that's had a lot of international interest. Also, other ones that have had English adaptations, like Notre Dame de Paris, Starmania, Romeo and Juliet. So I was really impressed with that when I saw that. I had a little fangirl squee that they'd included some of these shows as well. That really kind of probably raised the book up to the 5 stars. I've maybe been hovering around a 4, 4.5, but I was like, to include those as well definitely made the work for me. Next up, The Black Butler Artworks Volume 2 by Toboso Yana. Volume 1 I'm trying to get hold of at the moment. I had ordered a copy and I was told it had posted, and then weeks later it never arrived, and I managed to get a refund. And I've just placed an order for a copy from somewhere else, so I'm just waiting to hope that they can fulfill it and it's going to ship and I'll get it. So fingers crossed. But in the meantime, it was easier to get Volume 2. My husband bought it for me for Christmas. So as the title says, this is an artworks book. So it's just beautiful colour illustrations by Toboso Yana from Black Butler. Some of them are the front covers that we used on the books, some other artwork that hasn't been shown anywhere else that she's done for the series. 5 stars. It's a beautifully presented book, looks awesome, and I just hope I can get Volume 1 now to complete the set. And finally, we are on to the last book, people. I know it's been a long one today, hasn't it? But we are here now. This is No Longer Human by Dazai Osamu. Now, Dazai is a character in Bungo Stray Dogs manga and anime, which is how I came to know him. Obviously, he's also a famous author in Japan, but I'd never heard of him until I watched this anime. And watching the anime has made me interested in trying some of the books by these famous Japanese writers. And Dazai is my favourite character in the series, so he's the one I started with. He's kind of thought of as bit as Japan's Dostoevsky. So, and I think that's pretty accurate. No Longer Human is a really fascinating study of this guy who feels really detached from humanity and from the people around him. I suppose there's a bit of a warning, you should say there are suicide elements to this story as well. Again, I don't want to spoil it. I'm not going to tell you what happens to him in the end or anything, but it was a really fascinating psychological study of human nature, how we view ourselves, how others view us as well. And I gave it 5 stars. Definitely really keen to read some more by this author. I think there's another 2 or 3 works that are available in English translation, so I'm going to aim to get those during 2020. After that, I'll be stuck until my Japanese improves enough for me to read in the original language, which could be a little while. But I've got some other authors I can check out as well in the meantime. The only final thing to say on reading is that I'm still ongoing with a few manga series that I'm borrowing from the library or getting myself. Devils and Realist, Pandora Hearts, Love Stage, Loveless, Platinum End, and 10 Count. So I'm still ongoing with all of those. Oh, and Tokyo Ghoul Ray as well. So all of those are still in progress as I read through the volumes. So I'll talk about them when I finally finish the series completely. And on that note, all that's left really is to wrap up the reading year. So I had a very successful reading year. I completed my own personal challenge. I also knocked a few more books off my other personal challenge, which is to read a book written by an author born in every country in the world. So I've still got a long way to go on that one, but I did cross a few more off, and hopefully I can cross a few off in 2022. My Goodreads challenge I set at 150 books, as I do every year. And this year I actually read 360. That includes about 100 of those were manga volumes. So, you know, around probably 250-ish in terms of other books. So I'm really, really thrilled with that. It was a big reading year for me, and hopefully 2020 I can go on and read plenty of other wonderful books as well. If you're interested in doing reading challenges, I do have a reading challenge of my own that I am running, and once this is all uploaded to YouTube, I will add a link in the description below the video to the blog post where I outline the challenge for this year. Essentially, the challenge has 25 categories. If you want, you can use one book for multiple categories. So it's a fairly simple, easy one. If you're just looking for a challenge that's not too in-depth, that you've got plenty of time to get through, I hope you'll check it out. And as I said, I'll pop the link below. I'm going to end there because I've been going for over half an hour telling you my books for the month. So I will close. I'll be back again in the new year with more vlog content for you. I've got various tags I've recorded. I'll be doing more of my end of the month wrap-ups. And of course, I'll be back once a month with my friend Alina for our genre talk live streams as well. So I do hope you'll continue to join me here on YouTube during 2020 and that you'll enjoy my content. If there's anything you want to see me do in particular, do drop me a comment and let me know. And if I'm able to, I'll make that content for you. I will close there and say Happy New Year, everyone. Bye for now.